Thank you for tuning in to Wednesday Inspirational Book Lounge. I'm your host, Anna Murby. Today we welcome back Pastor Hubert Carl as he reads to us the well-known Green Leaf in Drought Time, a harrowing missionary story of a family who gave up everything to do pioneering missions work in inland China. Enjoy the show.
Green Leaf in Drought by Isabel Kuhn, published by China Inland Mission, 1959. Read by Hubert Carl. I thought I'd add some background information on this book. The book started in mid-1950 and ended in mid-1953. What's not in the book, and is never mentioned, is that the Korean War was at exactly the same time. It started in June of 1950 and ended in July 1953. The reason that the communists hated the Matthews so much was not only that they were Christians and believed in God, but the Americans and the Australians were fighting them in the Korean War. He was Australian and she was American. Chapter 9. Though the mountains shake, the first sign that a new heat wave was advancing on them came in the spring of 1952, when the accusation meetings began. Every single Chinese was forced to criticize himself and his neighbor in order to prove his loyalty to communism, especially anyone who had had any connection with a foreigner. The Red regime could not allow the belief that there could be any good American or Englishman. If you say so, you are revealing the fact that you are pro-imperialist in your heart. You must accuse the foreigner of your acquaintance with some sin against the government in order to clear your own skirts of the suspicions that you are pro-imperialist. And to be pro-imperialist meant death. May 5th, 1952 is marked as the day when Ben returned from sinning when he had been summoned to confess his faults. As he went, Arthur and Wilder were much in prayer, for they knew he would be forced to criticize them in some way or another, or imperil his own life. As they prayed, their minds were directed to Psalms 138, verse 7 and 8. Though I walk in the midst of trouble, you will revive me. You will stretch forth your hand against the wrath of mine enemies, and your hand will save me. The Lord will perfect that which concerns me. Both Ben and Timothy had been in the habit of dropping in each evening for fellowship, and it had greatly sweetened their days. As Ben returned from sinning, he passed them by without a speech, but a significant look set their hearts at rest. That evening after the dark, he came to them secretly and told all what had happened. He had been so helped in selecting criticism of them, there was no new tangible thing for the regime to lay hold of. God had stretched forth his hand. The next week, Timothy was called up. When he returned some days later, they knew in a second that the outcome had been unfavorable. His face was dark as he entered the compound, and a cloud seemed to descend over everyone within the same walls. Gradually they learned that Timothy had played traitor, not only to them but the Chinese Christians, Pastor Jen and Chin, and so on. One must remember that Timothy had been careless originally and coming to Haiwan not to register with the police on arrival. This may have been used to pressure him, poor fellow. But these two boys are a very fair representation of what happened to the Chinese church as a whole when it went through the accusation meetings. Timothy was now sent back to their compound to live in their midst and spy on everyone's actions. He was followed very shortly by a visit from the police, who denounced them fiercely and forbade anyone in the compound to speak to the imperialists in pain of going to prison. Timothy was there to tell if it occurred. May 14th has a sad little note. From then on, no one in the compound or any Christians would speak to us or notice us in the slightest. There were 2 Chinese families and themselves living in the inner courtyard, and the 2 pastors' family in the outer courtyard. They passed by each other daily in common tasks of hauling water and tending their garden plots, but now it was in silence and with averted faces. More than that, the police placed the white people under arrest. They were not allowed to go outside the compound. At that, Pastor Jin spoke up in alarm. "Well, sir, who is to draw their water from the river for them and buy their food?" The police hesitated. He may go to the river for water and to the market for shopping, but no other place than that. Life had been proscribed before, but now would be much worse, and shall not be careful in the year of drought. Jeremiah 17, verse 8. Lilla, of course, was included, and she had to have more than one spanking, poor child, before she learned that she might not show their picture book to Ben or to speak to anyone. May 13th, 1952, I'm plucking up courage to go to another butcher, meaning the dentist, tomorrow to have another tooth extracted. I've 2 to be done, so I'll give him the easy one first to see how he shapes. The former butcher is on bread and water diet. This refers to Dr. C. He had had the misfortune to have a patient die, and the accusation meetings made the most of it. He was in prison for a while, as Arthur indicated, and then he was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor. This removed him from the master bedroom over the kitchen, but Timothy immediately moved in there. It was an excellent place for a spy, besides being warm and comfortable. He could hear almost everything that went on in the kitchen below, and the front window faced the gate and the garden, so they saw all who came in and everything that happened. May 20th, 1952, Arthur writes, I had my tooth stumps painlessly extracted a fortnight ago. A Chinese dentist with the proper instruments had arrived in town, he being the second butcher. What a relief! I was having continual pain in my head, and it was that which persuaded me to go and have another shot. The stumps are out with no butchering as this time, and the head is okay. If I keep it up, I'll be toothless before I get out. The hot weather was now approaching, and the unclean conditions beneath their bedroom were a trial. Dr. C had kept some Tibetan patients there, and as these never bathed and had no idea of sanitation, the place became smelly and dirty. Added to this, the Chinese had tied up their dog to the front window. The communists organized a clean-up movement, part of which was to kill rats, fleas, and dogs. Any dog on the street is pounced upon and dispatched. Someone had written of being kept awake at night by dogs yapping, and said they were dog-tired. Arthur replies, with a dog under our bedroom and an open toilet 10 to 15 yards from the kitchen door, you can wonder that in spite of all our precautions, Lilla had an attack of dysentery. This came just about 10 days after their experience of the joy of abandonment. Every testimony of victory was immediately challenged. It never fails. Dysentery is one of the more formidable baby diseases that white children face in Asia. Many have died from it, and many often go so quickly. Little Lilla had the bloody flux type, and soon she was screaming with pain. For half an hour, she just sat on her little rocker, rocking back and forth, screaming. She wouldn't allow her mother to touch her. Arthur went on the street to find suitable medication, but could get nothing. He came back and got down on his knees and prayed. This was the period when letters between Sinning and Hangwan were being delayed, refrigerated. Some from CP and Dr. Clark had taken 21 days, although the bus came daily, a matter of only 30 miles. At last they got the little one quieted and to bed. Then father and mother descended to the kitchen and the trunk, knelt down and prayed. They asked God what they should do. The thought came, write an open postcard of what medications you have in the house. Tell Dr. Clark her symptoms and ask him please to advise. An open postcard would carry less suspicion. Within 4 days, and while they were actually down on their knees praying that the answer from Dr. Clark would come quickly, came the open postcard with a doctor's instruction. This was the only day out of all the days of trial that the postman came before breakfast, and baby Lily pulled through. It was a real test to the anxious parents, but their peace of heart held. The best wine of delighting in his will did not fail them throughout the heart of this experience. Thus summer of 1952 passed with one flutter of get ready to go followed by familiar silence. Autumn had come, and Felix's monthly grants of money were getting impossibly small. If they could spend another winter in Hangwan, what would they do? The original $3 million, which the Shanghai Bank had sent them, and which Felix held, was now truly shrunk to a pitiful size. The question faced them, what should they do? Communist policy, obviously, was to move foreigners only when they became public liability, meaning when their money ran out. Felix had not asked them if they had any other funds elsewhere. As a matter of fact, they had. The mission had left them a plentiful supply in the Shanghai Bank. But why push this information unasked under Felix's nose? He would only dole out to them starvation allowance anyway. And why prolong it? Just how much they starved before he would grant them an exit permit. Was it fair to ask Lilith to starve? Should they go without food and give it to her? They both decided no. Her fate, if they died, would be worse than death. Throughout all these vexing questions, there was still peace of heart. They were merely seeking the mind of the Lord for today's actions. But as the winter of 1952 set in, it was obvious they would not have money for coal. Now the poor of the land burned leaves and coal balls, which were coal dust mixed with dung and water. In September 1952, Arthur decided that the time had come for him to do likewise. So getting a big sack, a broom, and a penknife, with little Lilla holding onto his finger and chatting happily, they sallied forth to join the Autumn Poor Brigade. Every child, mother, sister, even grandmother was out on the hillsides, sweeping up leaves, pulling up grass roots, collecting anything, everything that would burn for fuel for the winter. At sunset, they would return with their loads and empty them into the cellar for winter storage. Arthur writes, "I have been out day after day while the leaves have been falling, sweeping up leaves, picking up manure, gathering sticks, cutting iris leaves with a pocket knife, collecting about 50 pounds a day. As a result, we have been able to keep the stove occupied for our 2 fires a day to cook 3 meals for 10 or more days. It was merciful of the Lord to bring the shortage just at the time when the leaves were falling. The impossible thing to us is not that we should be supplied, but that we should be delivered from all our fears at the thought of another winter and turn to face it, not to run away from it, with peace and rest." In September, Arthur had applied to Felix for what he knew was the last of their funds in that man's hands. As he drew the money, he said to Felix, "I have this left here as you see. Please make arrangements for us after this is used up." But Felix did not arrange for anything. They had to go for the next 2 months on just $37.50, and cold autumn months they were. They were entering now on the period when for the second time Felix tried to starve them. How the Lord took care of them will be told in another chapter. But Arthur was forced into making coal balls. Dry leaves, of course, will not yield a fire consistently hot enough to bake anything. But on top of flaming leaves, these coal balls will catch and hold more heat for a short time. So he would select a seat out in the sun on which the cold, near winter days, and patiently mold coal dust and sheep dung with water from the river. For a gentleman to come in contact with dirt, let alone manure, was unspeakably degrading in Chinese eyes. The melted snow water made big cracks in his hands, which were painful, and he sat there day after day, patiently molding him. The Chinese who had to pass him were really touched. He heard one of them whisper, dear me, look at this, look at this." But he smiled cheerfully, and every evening together they had a praise service to the Lord. Only eternity will show what these green leaves and drought meant for the Chinese onlookers. Hudson Taylor once wrote, "The converts of Paul saw that the apostle deemed it a small thing to die for them. It is not mere preaching the gospel which will do what needs to be done. Our life must be one of visible self-sacrifice. There is much sacrifice in our lives which the Chinese cannot know. God knows all about it, and we can well afford to wait for His declaration of it and His reward. There is much that we have left for the Chinese which they have never seen. They must see self-sacrifice in things which they cannot but understand. We may reckon our lives loss instead of gain. We may safely account that we lack and lose and suffer for our most prized facilities for bringing home to the hearts of this people the glorious gospel of grace of God. Through all these trials, little was an asset, not a liability. Hundreds in the homelands were specifically praying for the little girl, and their prayers were answered. The time came when her milk money did not arrive, and for 1 week at least she was going without milk, eggs, or vegetables. Yet she never complained, and more than that, she encouraged her parents. One morning, when they were sitting down to millet porridge with nothing on it, she dug in vigorously, at the same time saying, "When the Lord Jesus makes the policeman give Daddy some money, we'll be able to have milk and sugar on my porridge." There were no complaints from her about any of the shortages, and she was filled with song. Only 3 years old now, she had unconsciously memorized the words of many of the hymns her parents sang those days. Arthur remembers squatting by the firebox of leaves and coal balls trying to toast some bewhiskered bread with nothing to put on it. There were times when he felt a kinship with the widow of Zarephath. She taught us that an empty barrel is one of the most awkward loads to carry, apart from God's help. No doubt she found that a barrel which only kept a bowl of flour in it at a time was rather awkward. So that evening, squatting beside that leafed and coal dust fire, trying to toast bread for a meager supper, the young father was feeling the awkwardness of it, when suddenly his little girl sitting beside him rocking back and forth broke out into song. In heavenly love abiding, no change my heart shall fear, and safe is such confiding, for nothing changes here. The storm may roar without me, my heart may low be laid, but God is round about me, and can I be dismayed? They have no knowledge that she knew those words. The father and mother looked at each other and silently marveled. But on she went into the second verse, sweetly warbling, to lift her parents into assurance of victory, and safe is such confiding. The old barrel, says Arthur, so ugly and bothersome. As we launch into reckless abandon to do his will, the sea became a road, and the barrel bounced along like an old friend, buoyant as a cork. We were being satisfied with the best wine, so what more could we want? Naturally, Lilla felt that the Chinese children were not allowed to play with her anymore. Wilda writes, Lilla misses her playmates very much. She loves her few books, and in summer enjoyed her sandpile. Even as I am writing, she is delightedly initiating a new cart which her daddy has just made for her out of a wooden box and some wooden wheels. The old one was too small and rickety. Often my heart is lifted up as she sits in her little chair, rocking vigorously and singing, Lord, I believe, Lord, I believe. All my doubts are buried in the fountain. Praise the Lord for the little life that helps to brighten our days. A further trial was to be added to those days. The Chinese in the compound were not producing adequately, and so they decided to make noodles, dry, and package them for sale. The Tibetans and Mongols were especially fond of carrying such home with them, so there was a good market for them. The Chinese cleared out the floor beneath the mission's bedroom, and that was a matter of gratitude. But they installed some noisy machinery that squeaked in all the most nerve-wracking keys. Arthur writes, we were enlightened every night, or we were, for we have got used to it now and go to sleep from 8:30 until midnight by 7 hilarious spirits banging, shouting, laughing, grinding in the room beneath. During the day, they manage to keep moderately quiet when there is no one out at that end of the house. But they positively shine as it gets dark and Lilla is put to bed. Needless to say, they are humble cooperators who have got going on a new run and are trying to make the most of their opportunity to multiply their fluker. Again later, we have wondered a lot how much of the details of our last winter's escapes and escapades were really glorifying to the Lord, and how much they produced a sigh of the poor things. Then, as we were being led along a similar path this winter, we hesitated before recounting the details. But we do want you to know all that we still need earnest prayer, and not the semi-hysterical prayer that his long delays often lead us into. We are sent as sheep without any degree of intelligence or personal security apart from the shepherd among wolves, and we are proving the shepherd's heart. And so the green of life, secretly satisfied despite the outward drought, continued to be a testimony of trust and not to be offended. Of trust, someone has written, with cheerful faith your path of duty run. God nothing does nor suffers to be done, but what you would yourself, but could you see, through all of the events of things as well as he.
Thank you again for joining Wednesday Inspirational Book Lounge. Stay tuned for another installment next week of Green Leaf in Drought Time.